I mentioned that these 3 weeks leading up to Palm Sunday each speak about an encounter people have with Jesus. And as we already have heard probably many times, these stories aren't only to familiarize us with episodes in Jesus' life, but rather they're to help us as we listen to those stories and see Jesus encountering people in significant ways, that we see that the gospel writers want it to be a living word that have us look inside ourselves and say, how is Jesus, or how does Jesus more so want to encounter each of us? We know he has a relentless desire to be in relationship with each of us, because obviously he's the full expression of God's love. And in God's love, he wants to connect. He wants to commune. He wants us to know that loving presence that created us and is with us always. And so as we listen to these gospel stories, we can look more deeply into our own life. This first week, we hear from the woman at the well. And again, familiar to us. And we see a key point: Jesus initiates the relationship then and now. Remember, he says to the woman, "Give me a drink." He starts the conversation. For all of us, we need to see, maybe we don't think of it this way, that in our own life, when maybe we're drawn to the Lord or something happens and we're moving toward a greater sense of his purpose and so forth, that part of what's going on is the Lord has already been inviting us. We may not be conscious that it's God, but something in us is stirring to want to seek more, to be open to more. And that stirring ultimately comes from the God who wants to be in deep relationship with us. I want to talk a little bit also about this woman at the well story relating to my own story. But as I talk about this, again, as I've mentioned before, think of your story. Think of how God is speaking similarly in different life stories to every one of us to draw us into his love. So for me, I look back and as you already know some of this story, when I was, the summer before I was coming to the University of Akron as a freshman, 1965, I was already sensing something stirring within me. God was definitely at work. And notice in that gospel, when Jesus talks to the woman at the well, he talks to her about her thirst. And of course, initially she sees it as, well, yeah, I'm here at the well, I'm thirsty for water. But then he goes on to say to her, you have a deeper thirst. And I want to speak to you about that. I want that thirst, your spiritual thirst, to be quenched. Look at her life. She'd had 5 husbands, and the one she was with wasn't a husband. She had probably looked throughout much of her life for significant relationships of love that let her know that she was cared for, and it wasn't working out. She had a thirst for someone, somehow, to help her see a deeper sense of the goodness of love, a deeper sense of that she mattered to somebody, ultimately to God. That was her thirst. Well, going back to my story, your story, I know I had a thirst going into my freshman year at the University of Akron, leaving high school. Well, and I wasn't sure exactly what it was initially. I knew that I had a lot of things going for me. I did well in school. I had good friends. I had a joyful spirit. But still, I'm thirsty for more. And I think what I came to realize going into the fall is my thirst was ultimately for God. Because I had in high school gotten away from God and faith and all that stuff. But it was touching me then that I wanted a deeper sense of a love that is ever present, ever forgiving, and everlasting. Where do you find that kind of love? And for me, I was being drawn to see it in God. And so in the summer, I had taken instructions in the Catholic faith, but I still feel sorry for the guy who was giving me instructions, the priest, because you know me, I'm enthusiastic and out there and lots of questions. He was a real gentle, quiet, strong introvert. Poor guy didn't know what to do with me. But the point being, I went there a couple times, but it wasn't clicking. you know, and I could have given up, but no, this was still within me. So my friend invited me to the Newman Center at the University of Akron Catholic Student Center in the fall, and I went. The very first day that I was there was the first day the priest was there. He had been on assignment in Cleveland, but it was his first day at the Newman Center, Father Tom Dunphy. And right away, first day of going to class, his first day there, he had a mass. Wow. In some way, again, God at work. In some way, listening to him, I was touched deeply. It was speaking to a thirst that I was beginning more and more to realize I had, that I was thirsty for. And he spoke in a way that really spoke to my life. And so what I did with him, I mentioned this before too, I started taking instructions in the fall. And right away, every Monday evening at 7 p.m., I would go for instructions. And somehow, some way, I was so looking forward that this was what I was ultimately yearning for. And I was becoming aware, to have a deeper sense of what life is all about, its greatest meaning, the ultimate source of love in Jesus Christ. We talked. Back then, we had the Baltimore Catechism with questions and answers, but he went away from that too. He would talk about life and Jesus and the Spirit and relating to everyday life and everyday circumstances that I was going through at my age. And also, during that time in the 60s, there was all the talk about civil rights movement, the peace movement with Vietnam going on. We talked about some of those real issues and about how would faith and really believing and centering in Jesus make a difference in how I looked at all of that and responded to all of that. So that was powerful for me as an 18-year-old. And so then I decided to go forward, and again, I believe it was the Lord calling me to become Catholic, to enter into this deeper relationship with Jesus at Christmas. Right before that, and I relate to this to the woman at the well story too, right before that, the priest asked me, because I had been baptized as a younger age, he said, okay, now before you be coming to the church, you need to go to confession. And he said, well, when you were baptized? I said, third grade. Well, you need to confess all your sins from third grade until then as an 18-year-old. I said, even high school? You know, yes, even high school. And so anyway, I was able to do that, but I remember I was a little bit fearful. Notice the woman at the well, you know, that her sin, she was holding back. She wasn't going to say it, but Jesus knew it. Jesus knew, you have no husband. You have 5 who had your husband. Wow, he knew her. She could have thought, oh, now this rabbi, absolutely, he'd want to have nothing to do with me. He sees what a big sinner I've been now. I've messed up my life. But no, Jesus reached out to her more and let her see a loving God. And so too, when I went to confession, initially self-conscious, wow, the experience was beautiful. Father Tom Dunphy, again, facilitated that in a prayerful way. And right there, I came to know, whatever my past had been, whatever ways I messed up, right there the Lord was saying, I love you, I always have, and I always will. And I've seen since then, and would encourage you, the sacrament of reconciliation can be a beautiful encounter with the Lord, even if we don't have serious sin, but just that grace of the moment. And so then, I came into the church at Christmas. I mentioned that, my first communion, and there too, we often don't think of it, but the emphasis that we have on Eucharist, His Word, and especially His body and blood being fed by that. That's an encounter with Jesus. When we come forward, it's Jesus inviting us to come forward and saying, I want to give you myself. I want to give you, I want to live within you. I want to be part of you. And that's what the precious gift of Eucharist, and I remember that going back then. Then after that, as I've mentioned too before, that I started going to Mass every day. I went to Mass every day through my college years, obviously through my seminary, and I've gone about every day as a priest, right? You know, but going back to then. And I remember within about 6 weeks after I became Catholic that there was a retreat, and I went on it, and it was for Catholic students, and that's where I first heard the call from God. Remember, he initiates the relationship, Jesus calling me to be a priest. I remember thinking he had the wrong guy. I didn't even know the holy days yet. But the point being, he was calling. And I was called to respond. And that encounter that Jesus wants to have with every one of us. Hopefully we look back at a time in our life where, okay, he's calling us. To me, calling to be a priest. Part of that, again, I think the influence was Father Tom Dunphy that I knew in that fall, because he was so giving, because he spoke not only of human love, which is fundamental, but God's love that works through that human love, that there's a divine presence who loves us, and again, always will. And so his example, his inspiration, I think, led me to look into the priesthood. I make this point because we all talk about our own stories. There can be stories where other human beings influence us. It's one of the fundamental ways Jesus touches us is through others and their faith. So that happened. I eventually went to the seminary, was there for 5 years. I was ordained in 1974 as a priest. Father Tom Dunphy was there at my first Mass. He was also there the night we had a big celebration of my ordination. And just to tell you more about our relationship, because I had lived at the Newman Center for a number of years, I was doing some light maintenance. I couldn't do big maintenance, but light maintenance, helping out there. And so we were close. So at my ordination, the little gathering afterward that night, he spoke some very uplifting words about me. And then he razzed me, He kind of made some other points that were probably, a lot of them were true too, I think. But I remember just in his good-natured affection, kind of it was a little bit of a roast, and with Jesus at the center. So, friends, okay, all these years continued after 74. We would go out for lunch about once a month. And just be together and have this relationship. Well, back in 2017, when I turned 70 on February 27th, I turned 70, and I remember right around then, I connected with Father Tom Dunphy, and it struck me in my own prayer life and with him that I had first met him and encountered the Lord when I was 18. That's kind of the beginning of a young adult life. And there I was 70, in which a lot of people retire. So from 18 to 70, he had been part of my life. And he had shown me through his example, and I was able to share that with other people, of how we encounter the Lord in the gift of one another. And so that meant a lot. I reflected that day, as I had other times, of the difference the Lord made working through him in me. So that was February 27th, 2017. 12 days later, on March 11th, and this is why I'm talking about this, yesterday was March 11th, and I consider it a holy day now for me. But anyway, 12 days later, after my 70th birthday, and I was so grateful for Father Tom and the difference he made, one day on a Saturday morning, woke up, and his brother called me and said he had died. He had died suddenly in his sleep, And I remember at that time, 12 days, wow. How much he meant to me. Obviously, I was teary-eyed. Obviously, I had some degree of sadness. But then, as took time, as we all do, I realized what a gift. First of all, he went to the Lord right away. He didn't go through a particular struggle. But even more than that, it made me more reflect on the fact that there he was from the time I was 18 to the time I was 70, and a significant blessing for me. And so, again, because yesterday was 6 years that he died, I always remember on that day. You may remember loved ones, their date of death or their rebirth into God's love. And I know, beautiful, the communion of saints in our tradition, that he continues to pray for me. And I continue even that day when his brother said, oh, by the way, Tom wants you to preach his funeral mass. That also struck me. Awesome, tears, so forth, but grateful. And so ultimately for all of us to be grateful for all the ways Jesus Christ touches our lives and does it often through people, so to be grateful for them. That's fundamentally what it's all about. Jesus wants every one of us to have that encounter, to know he's always been there for us, he's with us in every moment, and he will be with us forever. And so today, again, think about your story. Maybe there's each of you that say, wow, I can look back and here's how God's been working in my life, and be grateful for the Lord and the people he's worked through. Take that quiet moment. It means everything. Jesus has a relentless desire to be in loving relationship with us always.